Justin Herbert played more than half of today's game with a fracture in his left hand and is expected to get surgery as a result of the injury sustained on this play. In this video, we'll talk about what the fracture could be and review some of our hand anatomy. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and the goal in this channel is to teach more about the medical side of the sports world. So this was the play that Herbert got injured, and what likely happened is just a helmet to the hand. We don't really get a clear view of what's going on, but this is something we talk about, players trying to do things to avoid injury. Whenever you have your fingers open, right, it's going to be much easier to jam your fingers. And so in some scenario, you could argue maybe trying to have your fist closed if you're going in to make contacts that you don't run the risk of jamming your fingers. But it looks like simply a helmet comes in and somehow that helmet just strikes Herbert on his left hand, and is when the break occurred. Now, what we don't know is what specific bone was injured. We catch a couple of little freeze frames here where we can see the left hand of Herbert. It doesn't look like anything is grossly out of place here. If we maybe try to really zoom in, maybe I could argue that you don't quite see the outline of one of the knuckles on his long finger compared to maybe his ring finger, but this is just trying to be very specific and hard to say just from watching the replay here any deformity in the hand or anything like that. Now, as we saw him run off the field here, it does look like, my suspicion is that this is going to involve his fourth metacarpal. I think if it was a finger, they would have said finger injury. So I think we have to assume this is truly the hand, which would fit more with the metacarpal bones, as we'll review in our anatomy tool. But here's he's running off the field. You see how there's like almost this depression, this little gap between what's going to be the fourth metacarpal right through there in the palm and then the phalanxes of his finger. It definitely looks like he's holding his ring finger in an abnormal position, almost as if, maybe it dislocated, but this little step off, this little deformity there that we're seeing, the contour on the back of his hand, makes me concerned that this is an injury to, I would say, his fourth metacarpal bone in the hand, if I was a betting man. The taping pattern that we saw in his fingers would also fit with an injury to either the ring finger, the fourth finger, or the metacarpal bone. He had so much padding on underneath this glove that I suspect he had some sort of immobilization or some like rigid, tape job that was put underneath his glove. But then we can also see that his long and his ring fingers are buddy taped to one another. And so that tells us that the injury is either to his long finger, the third finger, the ring finger number 4, or to those underlying metacarpal bones. If it was something like a fifth metacarpal, they would have had his fifth pinky, his pinky finger involved. He probably would have been in some sort of a gutter splint. And so I think suspicion here, either fourth metacarpal from how we were looking at that contour in the back of his hand, or one of the bones in his finger. So if we look here at our biodigital anatomy tool for the bones of the hand, looking here at the backside of a hand, these are going to be the metacarpals. The metacarpals are the long bones that sit inside our palm. And so the fourth metacarpal is going to be this one right here. As we move out to the fingers are the phalanges or the phalanxes. The proximal one is going to be the one closest to the rest of the body, the middle, and then the distal is the one furthest away. When we get up into the wrist, these are going to be the carpal bones sitting right here in the wrist. And then the forearm is going to be the radius and the ulna. With like Aaron Rodgers, he's talked about having multiple fractures in his wrist. I honestly don't know if that means he's got the same bone, but it's fractured in 3 places, like it's comminuted. Surely that doesn't mean that 3 separate bones in his wrist are broken, because there would typically be a lot of instability underlying that. So not entirely sure, but just breaking down the anatomy again, metacarpals are going to be the bones in the palm. Phalanges are going to be the finger bones. Other than the thumb, we have a proximal, a middle, and a distal phalanx with digits index finger through the fifth. Another thing that you'll sometimes hear in the sports medicine world with finger injuries is how we number them and how we classify them. So what some people will make the mistake of is saying like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then it can be confusing if the thumb is considered 1 or if the index finger is considered 1. So the proper way that you'll hear most hand surgeons refer to these is thumb, index or pointer finger, long finger, because that's the third, is going to be the longest finger, right? Ring finger, and pinky finger. And that way you're describing the finger rather than relying on like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4 with the thumb being separate. So obviously with Herbert undergoing a surgery, to me that implies there's some degree of displacement, but also in the sports medicine world, there are some fractures, there are some injuries where actually doing a surgery up front might allow for a safer return to play earlier on. If you can put a plate, if you can put a pin or a screw in a fracture, you can have additional reassurance that it's going to stay nice and stable to allow somebody to come back sooner without as much fear with the fracture moving around. It does sound reasonable that Herbert could be back playing. Remember, they've got an extra day since they play, I believe, on Monday night next week. And so I expect, yes, some sort of pin, some sort of middle plate put in to help stabilize the fracture. We will still probably see him playing, of course, in some sort of rigid immobilizing splint, because even though the plate or the screw is in there, you still have to protect that hardware. You've got to protect the incision, the sutures. So not unheard of to see him come back next week because of what we can do to protect and stabilize, especially with it being the non-dominant side of a quarterback. Still extremely tough to get back out there and play through a broken hand for more than half the game. So kudos to Herbert. Hopefully surgery goes well, and hopefully we see him back out there next week. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know, as always, any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.